Okay, so what can go wrong? We're almost to the end of this section. If you use bad sampling methods, like, for example, two that we've talked about, convenience sampling, we think that's kind of bad. It's not going to lead to good, convenience is bad. You want to choose people randomly, and so when you just kind of choose the people that are closest to you, it's not usually a good way to go. Response bias is also, voluntary response is also kind of a bad method there. That's when you have like an internet poll or something, and you say, hey, you see the poll, and usually only people with really strong feelings respond, so it's not going to be very representative sample you're going to get, and it wasn't chosen randomly. People are choosing themselves. So those are both really bad methods, but we're talking a lot about bias today. And so when you talk about bias, other problems, these are more difficult to avoid. You can kind of minimize bias. It's hard to get rid of bias altogether. But one of the types of bias is undercoverage bias. So that's when some people are more or less likely to be chosen or cannot even be chosen as samples. So if I were to say, take the city of Memphis and try to kind of measure something about every single household, it's very possible that some people in Memphis are homeless and they don't have a household, and so I wouldn't be measuring them, right? Because they would not even possibly be chosen because I'm only calling or sampling households, and so there'd be some members of the population of Memphis that would not even be possible to be chosen. So maybe even other extreme examples you could talk about, like, so I'm trying to do people in Memphis, and then say people are in prison. Well, I'm probably not going to be talking to those folks. I'm talking more to people in households. So there's lots of different ways undercoverage could hit. It's hard to avoid some of that. How do you track down all the homeless folks? It's going to be challenging to get everybody if you're trying to study a pretty big population, especially. Non-response bias is going to happen. Whenever you give a survey of any kind, they either can't be contacted or refuse to participate. Think about it. If you get a phone call, are you going to answer the phone from someone who calls you asking, who you're going to vote for in the next election? It's very possible some of you just see caller ID, kind of go, oh, I don't recognize the number, I'm not answering the phone. Or you might actually answer the phone and they say, who are you going to vote for? And you say, none of your business, and hang up or something. And so non-response bias is going to occur. In fact, it used to be a little better percentage. Maybe about 30% would respond to a national poll for the election, and now closer to 10%, sometimes less than 10%, depending on the situation there. So there's a lot of non-response bias. We can't do that much about that. I guess we can incentivize people. Okay, so response bias occurs when there's a systematic pattern of inaccurate answers to a survey question. So systematic, like, it's kind of a classic example. It's kind of silly, but let's pretend that everybody in the class was doing drugs on a weekly basis. And I asked some person in the class, I said, hey, are you on drugs? And then the student, what do you think the student would say to me? Do you think they would say, Mr. McCullough, you're right, I am on drugs. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. Maybe I should do something about it. Or do you think it's possible they might be a little embarrassed about the fact that they're on drugs, and they might say something like, no, Mr. McCullough, I am not on drugs. I don't take drugs. And so it's kind of a silly example. But the idea is that sometimes we're embarrassed to actually tell the person interviewing us the truth, or we want to kind of make ourselves look better. Maybe you think the interviewer is, a cute guy from MUS, and you're like, I'm going to try to, say something because I don't want to let him down. I want him to think I'm amazing as a St. Mary's girl or something. And so you're not completely honest, or you just systematically kind of I think of it as not being honest. It could be something where it's just there's some kind of pattern there. I'm trying to think of another example, but typically I think of it, you're just trying to impress, or you're concerned about the person interviewing. Oftentimes it comes down to the person interviewing you, and you wanting them to think a certain thing about yourself, whatever that is. And so you might not always tell the truth, or you might shape your answers a certain way in that sense. So this is true. I think these two get confused a lot. So again, voluntary response, poll on the internet kind of thing, where people who feel strongly will respond, and it's optional. The person responding is choosing to be part of the survey or not, or you get a poll from email and you respond or you don't. But non-response bias is when you've been chosen as part of the study, so to speak, and you still refuse to participate. So that's different. And I think we have some control over whether or not we give out a voluntary response survey or not, but we can't control much about the non-response bias. That's going to happen just about any way. If you talk in person, you might be more likely to get a response than if you do this on the phone or the internet or phone or something else, but it's going to happen. And so we don't have as much control over non-response bias, where we can choose to go, I'm not going to do that voluntary response. I'm going to do something else, some other method. Let's look at this one. So sometimes bias occurs when people respond to interview questions dishonestly because of the pressure of giving socially acceptable answers. And this actually may have happened. There's some theories about this. I think there's different things about this particular really interesting election in 2016. It's the one that Donald Trump actually won. But it was interesting in that the polls beforehand usually had Hillary Clinton winning. And so it was kind of surprising. And one possible theory was that people were a little embarrassed to admit they were going to vote for Donald Trump for whatever reason. And this is a theory that's out there. It's one of the things that could explain why that happened. And so maybe the people responded, said they were going to vote for Hillary Clinton because that choice was more socially acceptable. However, when it's time to vote, they just voted for less for Hillary Clinton and more for Trump than was expected. There could have been other reasons as well, but that's one possible explanation there. Does the order questions are asked make a difference? Again, we're talking about bias. And just to mention this is just kind of like a little sub note, but how happy are you with life? You're asked that question, you could respond. The second question is, how many dates have you had in the last month? And that seems maybe as two separate questions. I don't think those are connected. It doesn't seem like. But if you ask them in a different order, how many dates did you have last month? Ooh, I didn't have any dates. How happy are you with your life? Ooh, I'm not too happy with my life. Like, you could equate the two. You could think that maybe the second question is connected to the first question in some way. And if that happens, then yeah, the order matters, whichever way, either way. So even the order that matters, or even one word, sometimes makes a difference in a good and bad question. Sometimes we word things in a vague way, and people aren't sure what we're saying, kind of thing. And so we have to be very careful in the wording and the order of the questions, because bias is very easy to creep in there. In fact, it's almost inevitable. We can minimize it, though, by asking better, more clarifying questions, very clear questions, and also be careful about the order in which we ask questions even. So all those things matter. They affect bias. Again, it's something that's going to have some effect. Does it? It certainly does.